evening.
Die, frog, die. Okay. Welcome to the 25th Ghost Walk here in Elizabeth City. I'm glad to see you all here. Don't forget we have 6 other stops besides this one, plus a presentation at the Preyer-Cropsey-Outlaw. It's all in your ticket. Please enjoy the entire trip. Right now, you're standing in front of the Preyer-Cropsey-Outlaw house. It's a little bit on the older side. It's been here for over 100 years. About 122 at least. Well, yeah, 132, excuse me. It was built in 1891 for the industrialist R.O. Preyer. It is an impressive and distinctive example of the Queen Anne style. A main feature is the 3-story central square tower, all the way up yonder, with pyramidal roof. Yes, say that 3 times. A Victorian porch, which is not the original, shelters the facade. In 1898, William Cropsey of Brooklyn, New York, relocated his large family to Elizabeth City, where they resided in this house. On November 20th, 1901, tragedy struck when the Cropsey's daughter, Nell, disappeared from this 20-front porch. 35 days later, Nell's lifeless body was pulled from the Pascagoula River, which is right there, right behind you. Nell's murder has remained unsolved to this day. And like many old towns, we have a restless spirit that has been seen roaming the porch tonight. Could it be Nell Cropsey's sister, Ollie?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm out taking some air. I'm Ollie Cropsey. I lived here in this house with my parents and my 8 siblings. On November 20th, 1901, my sister Nell disappeared from this very front porch. Her lifeless body was pulled from the river 35 days later. The mystery of her murder has never really been solved. She was just 19 years old. I remember the events of that evening as if it were yesterday. I go over it in my mind, what happened. Our cousin Carrie was visiting from Brooklyn. Carrie, Nell, and I were sitting in the dining room after supper. My gentleman caller, Roy Crawford, stopped by. Nell's beau, Jim Wilcox, also came by. Nell was awful to Jim all evening. She was rude to him, and she was making fun of him. She had been behaving badly towards Jim for a very long time. I didn't understand how he stood for it. Around 11 o'clock, when the clock struck, Jim rose to leave, and he asked to speak to Nell outside. Nell looked at me, and I nodded. That was the last time I saw my sister alive. At 11:30, I let Roy out the front door. It was wide open, and so was the vestibule door. Nobody was outside. I shut the door behind Roy, and I went upstairs to where I shared my bedroom with Nell, thinking she had already gone to bed. It wasn't until I was about to go to sleep that I realized Nell had never gone to bed. At 12:30, I awoke, and Nell still had not returned. I thought for sure she was outside talking to Jim. At 1 o'clock, there arose a commotion in the backyard. A vagrant was trying to steal one of our pigs. Papa grabbed his shotgun and he headed outside. I called to him that Nell and Jim were still out here. It was at that point that the alarm was raised that Nell was missing. Papa and the sheriff went to Jim Wilcox's house to ask him about Nell's whereabouts. He said he left Nell here on the front porch crying. He had broken things off with her and returned her picture. When Nell's lifeless body was pulled from the river 35 days later, the town was out for blood. Jim was arrested, tried, and murdered, and convicted for Nell's murder. served his time in prison for 15 years before Governor Bigot pardoned him. Jim returned here to Elizabeth City. But the townsfolk had a long memory. They shunned and they reviled Jim until ultimately he took his own life with a shotgun blast. Oddly enough, Jim wasn't the only person present in this house that night that took his own life by suicide. My gentleman caller, Roy Crawford, and her younger brother, Will, also took their lives by suicide. Was that a coincidence or something more nefarious? As for myself, I lived out the rest of my days as a recluse. A haunting specter that frightened the neighborhood children dressed in the style of 1901, a ghostly Gibson girl. There's one regret I hold to my dying day. When Nell asked me to come out on the front porch, why did I tell her to go? Why didn't I tell her, Nell, don't go out on the front porch?